What happens to a family when the world forgets they exist? When generations are left behind so long that reality begins to twist into myth? Somewhere in the folds of rural Appalachia, a mother named Lorraine Whittaker became the center of a story too strange to invent. A story that began with silence and ended in global curiosity. The family that shocked millions wasn't fiction. It was the result of generations cut off from the world, hidden in plain sight. A place where official records ended and isolation did the rest of its work. How could a family remain untouched for so long, unseen, unaided, and then suddenly exposed to the entire world overnight? Welcome to X-Archives. If you're joining us tonight, let us know in the comments below that where are you watching from. It helps us know where the story travels to. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and like this video, because what you're about to hear is one of the most haunting and misunderstood human stories in modern America. This is not a tale of horror by creation. It's one born from neglect, silence, and one woman's impossible attempt to keep a family alive when the world stopped looking. This is the story of Lorraine Whittaker. Long before Lorraine Whittaker's name became known, her world was already closing in. The place she called home sat deep in the folds of the Appalachian Hills, a landscape beautiful from a distance, but merciless to those born inside it. The roads wound inward, then stopped. Services that most towns relied on, clinics, schools, steady work, rarely made it past the first ridge. For the Whittakers, that boundary wasn't symbolic. It was literal. Generations grew up there without the means to leave. Not by choice, but by the quiet permanence of poverty. The valley offered no ladder out, no reliable transportation, no access to consistent medical care, no economy beyond odd jobs and barter. The rest of the country moved forward. This pocket stood still. For outsiders, it was an invisible place. For those inside it, it became the entire world. In that kind of isolation, survival depended on proximity. Families leaned on one another because there was no one else to lean on. Over time, the same few surnames appeared on every mailbox, every record, every small graveyard plot. It wasn't heritage. It was necessity. Geography, not will, created a closed circle that outsiders later mistook for defiance. Lorraine was born into that circle, not as a choice but as an inheritance. Her parents, and theirs before them, had lived within the same stretch of narrow valley. The local community, small and suspicious of difference, gradually withdrew from the family as rumors spread. Isolation deepened, reinforced by distance both physical and social. What began as neglect turned over time into quiet abandonment. By the time Lorraine was raising her own children, that withdrawal had hardened. The local store might sell to them, but few would speak. Government agencies marked their existence, but rarely visited. The world beyond the hills felt unreachable, and within them life reduced to routine survival. Tending, repairing, enduring. When later generations looked in from the outside, they saw only the aftermath. A family bound by closeness and hardship. They mistook endurance for anomaly, poverty for peculiarity. Yet the truth was far simpler. The Whittakers were the natural result of being forgotten. Lorraine's story began where opportunity stopped. Everything that defined her life, strength, exhaustion, isolation, traced back to geography that refused to change. The valley had built its walls slowly, and by the time she inherited them, they felt immovable. It began quietly, a rumor carried beyond the ridge, a few curious travelers asking for directions to the family that lived different. Then came the cameras. The first group arrived without warning, their presence both foreign and final. The Whittakers, once invisible to the outside world, were suddenly surrounded by lenses and voices that didn't belong. For the outsiders, the family was a discovery. For the Whittakers, it was an intrusion. Neighbors who had once ignored them now watched from a distance as vehicles wound through the dirt roads that had rarely seen strangers. The sound of shutters and questions filled a space that had been silent for generations. Lorraine stood at the center of it, though she never sought attention. While others spoke or stared, she moved quietly in the background, cooking, guiding, steadying. Her restraint became her shield. She understood that what these people wanted wasn't her story, but the image of it. And so she gave them nothing. The footage spread quickly. Clips appeared in documentaries, then across news outlets and online spaces. What should have been a study of hardship turned into spectacle. Strangers debated the family's appearance, their behavior, their value. Few asked what had led them there. The same world that ignored them for decades now consumed them for entertainment. Every frame captured their reality but stripped it of context. Poverty became a curiosity. Suffering turned into content. The story was no longer theirs to tell. Lorraine remained the unspoken constant. The calm figure behind every doorway, the one pair of eyes that never looked away from her family, while the world stared in. That first wave of attention changed everything. It erased the line between witness and participant, between empathy and intrusion. Once the world had seen them, there was no going back. In the background, Lorraine kept working, quiet, deliberate, unchanged. The outsiders left, but the echo of their visit remained. What they saw as discovery would linger as damage, reshaping her family's life long after the cameras stopped rolling. When the cameras were gone, and the valley returned to silence, life inside the Whittaker home continued much as it always had. The rhythm was steady, built on repetition and necessity. Lorraine rose early, not because of routine comfort, but because every day demanded it. The stove needed tending, clothes needed washing, and someone always needed her hands more than she needed rest. There were no clear roles within the household, but everyone depended on her. She was the quiet center, the one who understood what each movement meant, what each sound required. When meals appeared on the table or small tasks were done, it was Lorraine who had made it happen. She kept the fragile order alive in a place the world had already written off as chaos. Her strength didn't come from pride or faith in recognition. It came from absence and of options, of help, of pause. Years of caregiving had reshaped her body into something functional, worn but unyielding. The weight she carried wasn't just physical. It was the constant calculation of survival in a home where stability depended on her alone. Outsiders saw confusion in the family's movements, misunderstanding in their communication. What they couldn't see was the structure underneath. A system Lorraine built from instinct and persistence. She knew who needed to be fed first, who required more patience, which sound in the night meant fear, and which meant nothing at all. Her world was made of details invisible to everyone else. She never spoke about exhaustion, though it followed her everywhere. When attention from beyond the hills cast her life into public view, no one asked what it meant to live that way. To be responsible for everything while receiving nothing in return. Her care was constant, quiet, and rarely acknowledged. In the years after the outsiders left, little changed. The home aged, supplies dwindled, and Lorraine kept working, cooking, cleaning, repeating. Her world revolved around maintaining what little could still be held together. It wasn't heroism or martyrdom. It was endurance, plain and unspoken. Through all of it, she remained the fixed point in a story that others chose to misunderstand. Behind the headlines and whispers, Lorraine was not a mystery or symbol. She was motion itself. The reason her family continued to exist at all was because she refused to stop moving. For years, Lorraine carried a burden that should never have been hers alone. What appeared to outsiders as a family frozen in time was, in truth, the product of a system that never showed up. The Whittakers didn't fall through the cracks. The cracks were the only structure that existed around them. No consistent healthcare ever reached their valley. When illness came, it stayed. When confusion deepened, it went untreated. County records noted the family's existence, yet visits from social workers or medical staff were sporadic, sometimes decades apart. Reports were written, funding promised, but follow-through never arrived. Paperwork moved farther than people ever did. Lorraine knew this better than anyone. She had called, written, and waited, small, quiet efforts that went unseen. Requests for medical assessments, housing repair, or social aid dissolved into silence. Officials cited remoteness or limited jurisdiction, explanations that changed nothing. Every unanswered letter was another reminder that she and her family lived beyond the reach of care. The landscape itself made intervention inconvenient. Narrow roads, long distances, and limited infrastructure kept officials away. When help did appear, it was temporary. A short assessment, a polite assurance, then departure. Promises replaced presence. Lorraine learned not to expect return visits. As the years passed, neglect hardened into normality. Generations grew up without consistent education or support. What began as geographic isolation evolved into bureaucratic abandonment. Systems built to protect the vulnerable functioned only where visibility existed, and the Whittakers were invisible by design of their location. Lorraine's resilience filled the vacuum left by that absence. When a child fell ill, she improvised remedies. When food ran short, she rationed and went without. Her survival skills replaced the health care that never came. Her endurance substituting for all the assistance that should have existed. To outside observers, the family's condition seemed inevitable, even self-inflicted. Few recognized how decades of inaction had shaped every hardship that followed. The tragedy wasn't defiance. It was neglect institutionalized through apathy. By the time public attention returned, the damage was irreversible. The story of the Whittakers had already been written by silence. Lorraine had done everything possible to fill the spaces left by those who were meant to help. But she could only hold so much alone. What the world saw as strangeness was, in truth, the long shadow of systems that never came. The silence that had defined the Whittakers' world ended not with help, but with attention. After decades of neglect, their story resurfaced, this time not through local whispers or state files, but through screens. What had once been a hidden life in a remote valley was suddenly visible to millions. It began with a single video, filmed under the guise of documentation. The footage spread fast, shared and reshared across platforms where curiosity outweighs context. Viewers called it fascinating, disturbing, heartbreaking, and often all three within the same breath. Strangers analyzed every gesture, froze every frame, debated what they saw, as if the family were a case study instead of people. For the internet, the Whittakers were content. The same distance that had once kept them unseen now made them defenseless against a new kind of exposure. Lorraine, again, found herself at the center of a story she never agreed to tell. Behind every view count and headline was a repetition of what she'd endured for years, people looking but not seeing. A few voices online tried to offer kindness, donations, messages, sympathy, but the scale of ridicule drowned it out. Jokes and reaction clips spread faster than compassion ever could. The internet's curiosity became its cruelty, disguised as fascination. Each upload brought new attention but no lasting help. The same systems that had failed them on the ground now failed them in plain sight. Lorraine faced this wave with the same quiet endurance that had carried her through everything before. She didn't argue or explain. She continued living as she always had, even as the world dissected her life from a distance. To her, the cameras had simply changed shape. The valley that once contained her had grown global. Exposure did not bring understanding. It magnified misunderstanding. The story reached more people than ever, yet the truth slipped further away. In the end, the internet turned their isolation into spectacle once again. Proof that even in an age of connection, some people remain profoundly unseen. When the attention finally faded and the screens moved on, Lorraine Whittaker remained where she had always been, steady, uncelebrated, and necessary. The noise quieted, but her life continued in the same rhythm it always had. Slow, deliberate, unrecorded. What lingered wasn't the spectacle, but the endurance behind it. For decades, her existence had been filtered through misunderstanding. By locals who withdrew, by institutions that failed, and by strangers who mistook survival for spectacle. Yet beneath all of it, Lorraine's truth was simple. She had endured more silence than most people could stand. Every day of her life was shaped by the same decision, to keep going when no one came. Her legacy is not built on tragedy but on persistence. She held together what the world forgot, not with resources or recognition, but through repetition, the daily, unremarkable work of care. That effort was invisible to cameras and impossible to quantify, but it was the foundation of her family's survival. Where others saw disorder, she created structure. Where systems disappeared, she remained. The human cost of misunderstanding runs deeper than poverty or ridicule. It is the weight of being defined by others. The exhaustion of existing only as someone else's example. Lorraine bore that burden quietly. She asked for no correction, no defense. Her life itself became the argument, proof that dignity can exist even when stripped of choice. To look back on her story now is to recognize what society overlooked, the responsibility shared by everyone who saw but didn't act. The Whittakers' condition wasn't inevitable. It was sustained by distance, by the comfort of forgetting. Lorraine's endurance filled the spaces left by that neglect. But no one should have had to endure that much alone. In the end, her story offers no dramatic closure, no redemption arc. It leaves something quieter. A reminder that survival without support is not resilience to be praised, but evidence of failure to be remembered. Lorraine Whittaker's name deserves not fascination, but respect. Her truth is not in the label history gave her, but in what she carried when no one else would. If you've made it this far, take a moment before you scroll away. Stories like Lorraine Whittaker's aren't legends. They're reminders of how easy it is for entire lives to vanish in the corners of our own country. What happened here wasn't mystery. It was neglect disguised as fate. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and what you think should have been done differently. Your voice helps keep these forgotten stories alive. If you found meaning in this story, subscribe to X Archives and help us continue documenting the hidden, the overlooked, and the nearly erased. Because sometimes remembering is the only way to make it right. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious and stay human.